In 2025, the world noticed something surprising. The Philippine Army, once a quiet jungle force, had jumped to 41st place out of 145 countries in the Global Firepower Index. But how did this small island nation, long overshadowed by its Asian neighbors, suddenly rise like this? This wasn't just a normal upgrade. Today, the Army commands over 110,000 active troops and holds missiles that can strike over 1,000 kilometers away. A force that once wore slippers in muddy forests now launches cruise missiles from high-tech mobile platforms. Once, these soldiers chased rebels through thick jungle, barefoot and underfed. Now they're training alongside US Marines and Japanese forces, firing real tomahawks, real naval strike missiles, in real war drills. What happened? What secret shift turned a tired force into a rising power? What changed in the shadows while no one was watching? And how is this rapid rise shaking the entire balance of power in Asia? Stay with us, because in the next few minutes, we'll uncover how the Philippine Army rose from the ashes of history to become a force that's now redrawing Asia's military map. After World War II, the Philippines had to start over. Its cities were in ruins, its people were tired, and its army was almost broken. So they began again. But this time, the army had a new mission. Not to fight wars abroad, but to protect the country from within. Insurgents, rebels, and armed movements were rising from the mountains and jungles. The soldiers were sent to stop them. But they didn't have much. They used old rifles, rusty helmets, and whatever the Americans left behind. They wore faded uniforms, slept in tents, and marched with hope, not equipment. Many had to walk barefoot through the jungle. Some had only a few bullets in their belts. Still they fought. They fought against communist guerrillas. They battled separatist fighters in the south. They knew the land. They moved like shadows through the trees. They became experts in jungle warfare. But that was also their trap. While they learned to fight in the jungle, the rest of Asia was moving forward. Countries like Indonesia, Thailand, and Malaysia were upgrading their weapons, buying tanks and jets, building strong military bases. But the Philippine Army, still chasing rebels with hand-me-downs, still waiting for supplies that came late, or never came at all. The world was changing fast, but the Army was stuck in the past. They had courage, but not enough tools. They had strength, but no modern shield. And so the question grew louder. When would they stop being the army of the jungle and become the army of the future? By the early 1980s, the world was changing, but the Philippine Army was still left behind. Other countries in Southeast Asia were buying fighter jets, warships, and missile systems. The Philippines, still trying to fix old machines. Their army had some gear, Simba APCs, B-150S, and old M113S from the US. But those machines were slow, and their guns were no match for modern weapons. Soldiers had the heart, but not the hardware. While others had night vision, Filipino troops used flashlights. While others used GPS, they followed maps in the dark. They were still the same brave men, men who had survived the jungle, men who knew how to fight with nothing. But now, the battlefield was changing. It wasn't just rebels in the trees anymore. It was growing threats from the sea and from foreign skies. The South China Sea was heating up, and the Philippines had little to defend itself. Still, they trained. Still, they patrolled the borders. Still, they stood tall in outposts with no roofs. They showed the world that Filipino courage never fades. But even the strongest spirit can't stop a missile with a rifle. And deep down, the leaders knew they couldn't protect the nation with just old parts and raw bravery. They needed a plan. They needed real change. The question wasn't if, it was when. So what program came in the next decade that finally broke this cycle of weakness and opened the door to a new era? In 2012, something finally changed. The armed forces of the Philippines launched a bold new plan. It was called the Revised AFP Modernization Program. For the first time in decades, real money started flowing into the army. They began investing in armor, in heavy artillery, and elite special forces. The goal was simple: to protect the nation with modern tools. Step by step, old gear was replaced with new firepower. Soldiers who once carried rusty rifles were handed fresh M16s and newer M4 carbines. Then came the G36 from Germany, then the compact MP5s used by commandos. Even their eyes got an upgrade. Night vision goggles arrived, No more walking blind in the dark. Now they could fight with clarity and confidence. It wasn't just about weapons. It was about trust. The government was finally backing its own troops. Training improved. Supplies became steady. Morale started to rise. From the outside, it looked like slow, small steps. But inside the Army, the change felt big. It was no longer a forgotten force. It was a force preparing for the future. The world didn't notice yet, but something powerful was growing. A new kind of soldier, a new kind of strategy, a new kind of Philippine Army. The seeds were planted, quietly, carefully, and with deep purpose. No headlines, no parades, just long hours and quiet progress. But all of it was building towards something greater. The jungle fighters were evolving, and their boots were now stepping onto a new kind of battlefield. But how did this slow progress turn into a dramatic leap by 2025? By 2025, everything looked different. The Philippine Army, once overlooked, was now standing tall under Lieutenant General Antonio Navarrete. From their command base at Fort Bonifacio, a new chapter was being written. The Army had grown to 110,000 active troops. No longer a small, tired force. This was now a strong, ready machine. And behind this strength was something the Army had rarely seen before: money. The total defense budget hit a record 272 billion pesos. Out of that, 138.2 billion pesos went straight to the Army. There was a 35 billion peso modernization fund and a 40 billion peso standby allocation for quick emergency purchases. For the first time ever, money matched the Army's ambition. No more begging for scraps. No more waiting for hand-me-downs. This time, they could build the Army they had always dreamed of. They began buying new gear. They hired more troops. They expanded their training programs. Barracks were rebuilt. Firing ranges were upgraded. Officers were sent to train in Japan, Australia, and the US people started noticing. The Philippine Army wasn't the forgotten branch anymore. It was no longer the poor cousin of the Navy or the Air Force. It had become the core of the nation's defense. Soldiers felt it. Commanders felt it. Even the people on the streets felt pride again. For the first time in decades, the boots, the rifles, and the training all moved with one purpose. But this leads to one big question. Where did all this money go? And what weapons now define the Army's power? By 2025, the Philippine Army had built real muscle. The days of old rusty gear were finally over. The infantry was now rearmed and ready, the same used by top special forces worldwide. Add to that body armor, advanced helmets, and high-tech optics. Now every squad could fight harder and survive longer. But the real game changer came with the armored forces. The Army rolled out new ACV-15 infantry fighting vehicles. They brought in Sabra light tanks from Israel. They fielded deadly Atmos 2000 howitzers that could strike from long distances with brutal accuracy. And soon, they would add VBTP-MR Guarani amphibious vehicles from Brazil, built for island and jungle terrain. The once rifle-only Army was now a true combined arms force. They had mobility, they had firepower, they had options. Now they could hit hard, move fast, and adapt to any battlefield. Enough to crush rebels in the jungle and stand strong against rising powers in the region. The Army no longer just chased shadows. It now stood as a solid wall, a shield with real steel behind it. But there's one thing even more important than weapons, because at the heart of every machine, every gun, every mission is the soldier behind it. So the next question is this: weapons alone don't win wars. What elite soldiers give the Army its true edge? Before we reveal the secret weapon, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more global power shifts. By 2025, the Philippine Army had more than just weapons. It had warriors, elite fighters, quiet professionals, men trained for the hardest missions. These were the Scout Rangers, the Special Forces Regiment, and the Light Reaction Regiment. Each one sharpened by real jungle wars. Each one tested in blood and sweat. These weren't just units, they were legends. Built on years of battling insurgents, but refined through joint training with global powers, to drills with Japan's elite self-defense forces. These Filipino soldiers stood shoulder to shoulder with some of the best warriors in the world. They practiced hostage rescues, sniper drills, and complex urban warfare. They took it to the next level. Live fire missile drills on the coastline shocked the entire region. Naval strike missiles fired from Philippine shores hit their targets far across the sea. The message was clear. The Philippines was no longer just watching history. It was now part of shaping it. With global training and elite troops, the Army had finally joined the ranks of real military powers. No longer playing catch-up. No longer stuck in the past. But there's one more piece to the puzzle. Because even the best soldiers need the right tools to match their skill. So what new weapons gave the Philippine Army a reach it never had before? Fast, smart, and hard to stop. Suddenly, Philippine troops could fight at sea, without even leaving the land. But that was just the beginning. They also received the new Typhoon missile batteries. These carried two powerful weapons, the SM-6 Interceptor and the Tomahawk cruise missile. One to defend the skies, one to strike deep into enemy territory. The Tomahawk had a range of over 1,000 kilometers. That meant the Philippines could now hit air bases, warships, even missile sites, long before the enemy got close. For the first time in history, the Army had true strategic reach. A force once known for jungle patrols now stood as a player in regional power games. This wasn't just defense anymore, it was deterrence. A clear warning to any power in the region. Don't underestimate the Philippine Army, because what was once a barefoot jungle force now holds the power to shape entire battles from a distance. But there's still one final secret to uncover. What explains why this rise is now truly unstoppable? By 2025, the Philippine Army was no longer just defending. It had become a true regional strike force, no longer stuck in the past. It was now shaping the future. Its combination of missile power and elite forces had placed it as the sixth strongest army in Southeast Asia. In just 70 years, it had gone from barefoot jungle fighters to battlefield commanders with cruise missiles and drone support. A force once chasing rebels in muddy forests, now trained to strike fleets, air bases, and missile sites. And behind this rise, there was a clear secret. It wasn't just new equipment. It wasn't just bold funding. It was the power of alliances, US advisors, Japanese drills, Australian war games. The Philippine Army learned, adapted, and evolved by standing side by side with global military powers. But none of it would have mattered without one key ingredient: the national will to rise. The government supported, the people believed, the soldiers delivered. Now the neighbors are watching, no longer seeing the Philippines as a weak island nation, but as a growing military force with reach, training, and resolve. A force backed by allies, powered by pride, and determined by history. This rise is no accident. It is the result of 70 years of sacrifice, learning, and unity. So the only question left is this: what does this unstoppable rise mean for the future of Asia? In 2025, the world could no longer ignore the truth. The Philippine Army had reached 41st place in the Global Firepower Index. This wasn't just a number, it was a sign of true, permanent transformation. The Army had climbed from the bottom and planted its flag in the ranks of serious military powers. Once the underdog of Asia, it now held strategic weapons that were once reserved for global superpowers. The missiles, the special forces, the global partnerships. This was no longer just defense. It was true deterrence. The lesson is powerful. With determination, with smart modernization, and with strong alliances, even the most overlooked nations can rewrite history. This is more than just an army story. It is a national rebirth. From post-war jungle patrols to precision missile strikes in 2025. From barefoot squads with borrowed rifles to a regional force shaping the future of Asia. The balance of power is shifting, and it all began with a force that once only knew how to survive. Now it knows how to lead. The question is no longer if the Philippine Army has risen, but how far it will go from here. A nation once overlooked is now impossible to ignore. The Philippine Army has rewritten its place in history, from quiet jungle patrols to commanding missile systems and global respect. Its rise is more than a military win. It is a story of national strength, and it proves something powerful. No force stays weak forever, not when there is a reason to fight for the future. If you enjoyed this story of power and transformation, hit subscribe for more global military stories. We dive into real-world shifts, where once small forces are now changing global maps. And now we want to hear from you. Do you think the Philippine Army can rise into the world's top 30 by 2030? Share your thoughts in the comments below, because this story is still being written, and you're now part of that conversation.